America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker with the Job Creators Network. As we know, small businesses are being squeezed by inflation, high interest rates, and policies made far, far from Main Street. Today, we're unpacking what a new Fed chair nominee means for the economy and whether Trump accounts could offer families a real path to long-term financial security. Economist Peter St. Onge from the Heritage Foundation joins me with insights that Washington isn't talking about. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, for our listeners who may not know your work at Heritage, how did you come to focus on economics through the lens of small business and Main Street? Because that is the language we talk here, is helping people understand and connect the dots to the craziness going on in DC and how it impacts our lives every day here on Main Street.
I think for me, what's fascinating about economics is that, so fundamentally, it's the study of choice. And most of what economists do is they look at the choices related to production. So how do we make life better? And you've got a lot of choices in life. You can choose who to marry. You can choose how many kids to have. You can choose where to live. A lot of economics looks at specifically production. And what it means to produce is effectively that you're doing favors for other people. So when I go to 7-Eleven, the girl there is kind enough to make me a sandwich. She doesn't know me, right? She doesn't know me any favors, but she makes me a sandwich, a delicious sandwich. Why? Because I pay for her electric bill, right? So it's beautiful what an economy does, which is it allows strangers to do things for each other. You don't have to be friends with people. You don't have to be related to them. Absolute strangers do wonderful things for each other. I go to the internet, people make fun videos to watch. They make documentaries. They make all these wonderful things for me. They heat my house. They raise and slaughter cows so I can have a hamburger. All these people, I don't know who they are. They don't know who I am. Maybe they like me. Maybe they don't. It doesn't matter. So to me, that's absolutely fascinating. It has been since I was a kid. And then that leads you to the question, okay, well, how do you make that kind of a system better? Because you can look at countries like North Korea where that system is broken, right? People in North Korea do not do favors for strangers. They do what they're told, and they don't do much. And so, then the question is, in an economy like ours, I think if you zoom back and look at what's happening, the American people are trying to do nice things for each other. Now, they're trying to do that because of, the invisible hand and Adam Smith. But we're trying to do nice things for each other. We're basically racking our brains to think up nice favors we can do for other people in the hopes that they'll do nice things for us. And then you've got this government that kind of sits on top like this giant tick, just sucking the blood out of everybody and slowing everything down. And so, unfortunately, it's an eternal battle to free the people to create and try to minimize the amount that the government is destroying.
Well, wouldn't you say we want to do nice things for each other in exchange for, it's almost an exchange. It's like, I will make this sandwich for you, but I want you to give me your dollars for it. So there's like a nice relationship exchange happening. I have something you want, and you have something I want.
And that's the key, is that what the invisible hand does, what capitalism or free markets, what they do is replicate a healthy friendship, a healthy relationship. You could, in theory, have a friend who makes you pay for beer every single time, and that friendship's not going to last. You guys aren't going to hang out in the long run, right? So there needs to be reciprocity. And what markets do is reproduce that altruism, that reciprocal altruism that exists in interpersonal relationships and it essentially converts that into a format where it can work among strangers. And so at that point, you've got 400 million people or 8 billion people who are all able to access this system where they can do nice things for other people and get nice things in return. And turns out when you allow that system to flourish, and you don't have to do anything, right? It's completely natural. But if you let that system flourish, then it turns out we have amazing things, right? We have wonderful qualities of life. The average American works for less than half their life, right? The average person retires at 65. You don't have to work when you're a kid anymore. We just have an astounding quality of life, to the degree that it is something that previous generations would just be blown away. They wouldn't believe us, right? If you look at the main health problem among poor Americans is obesity, eating too much food. This would be comical for almost the entirety of human history if you told them, yes, in modern times we have serious problems. People have too much food, right? For most of human history, even in functioning systems like the Roman Republic or Qing Dynasty China, you had periodic famines. You haven't had a famine except the ones that are specifically caused by governments, right? For example, the Ethiopian government intentionally bombing cities in order to starve unfriendly tribes. You have not had a sort of nature-made famine in centuries. It's astounding how much progress we've had. And all of that comes down to the free market's ability to replicate that reciprocal altruism that is built into friends and families. And then the question is, how do you scale that to the entire world?
That's interesting. It's also an interesting point you're making about the poor, and that the biggest health problem they have is obesity. And how did we get there? And why, if they're poor, how are they eating too much food to be obese? That's a very interesting point, actually. We're in a moment of real economic anxiety. People costs are still high. Although we've seen some costs come down, energy for one, I've seen definitely groceries come down. There's some things that are still high that still feel high. We've seen inflation come down. Wages are now, for the most part, at least the last time I looked, outpacing inflation, but people still feel bad. I'm going to ask you a two-part question. How do you think the overall economy is doing when you're, let's be nerds and look at all the reports and the GDP and the inflation? But then how do you think people are feeling? Because I feel like there's this huge gap between those two. And then how do we bridge them?
Yeah, so the economy right now is on fire. It's fantastic. We have growth, according to the Fed, that's at 5.5%. That is astronomical. That's higher than almost every month or every quarter since the Reagan administration. These are, Asia levels of growth. We're actually growing faster than China right now. Productivity growth is 4.9, which again is completely off the charts. Jobs are very strong. When you look at the job numbers, the headline jobs numbers are relatively flat. But remember, we just got rid of 2.5 million undocumented illegals. All right. And the vast majority of them were working because they were young. We also got rid of roughly 300,000 federal employees. So the fact that we're flat on jobs when we just got rid of roughly 2.5 million jobs is pretty astounding. So the job situation is very good. One of the biggest metrics on jobs is something called quit rates. Okay, and this is tracked at the Federal Reserve. The question there is what percent of people are quitting their jobs? And the reason that matters is that when people feel like it's really easy to get a job, they're more willing to quit. Maybe they don't like their boss, they're not satisfied at work, they want to try something new. And so quit rates right now are right about the median that they've been for the past 30 years. So I know the media is trying to push this Trump crash narrative, but actually, if you look at the statistics, the job crash, quote unquote, is undocumented in federal workers. In my opinion, the federal workers we got rid of were parasites, so good riddance. I'm glad that now they have to go find jobs that are actually productive and that serve their fellow Americans. So, across the board, we have a good jobs picture. We have blockbuster growth. Incomes, as you mentioned, are finally growing faster than inflation. That's something that hadn't happened for 2 years. They were actually down under Biden. They were even worse when you consider what the Fed was doing to interest rates, which then raised debt costs to the average American. So the Biden administration was catastrophic for the average American's finances. That's coming back bigly. The Fed, they just tallied $12 trillion in additional wealth over the past year, which thanks to Trump's policies. So stocks are up. A lot of that was tax cuts. When you cut taxes, that raises profits. That then raises your stock prices, which makes your retirement account worth more. So just across the board, it's a very, very good economic picture right now. I think it's particularly striking because the sort of mainstream economists and mainstream journalists had predicted Armageddon because of the tariffs. That's not happening. Tariff inflation is not being fed through. The Chinese exporters are eating it. Truflation, which has a real-time measure of over 1 million prices, they say we're actually running 0.8% inflation right. That is extraordinarily low. In fact, that's
what's truflation?
Yeah, TRU inflation. So that's a private inflation measurement company. And they go through and look at 1.5 million prices real time. Normally, they correlate 97% with the official CPI. So, this isn't some lunatic outfit. And during Biden, they were actually higher. They were estimating that inflation was higher, which is what people were feeling in their pocketbooks, but it's not what the Biden administration was saying. Now they're actually finding the opposite, that the official government statistics are counting inflation higher than they're actually seeing when they look at the real inflation. So the economic picture across the board is perfect. It's excellent. The trick, as you mentioned, is that, so if you take inflation, for example, if something cost $100 in 2019, and then by the time Biden was done with it, it cost $200. Well, if inflation is 0.8% now, then it's going to be $201.60. Okay, but people are still comparing that 200 to the old 100. Right. So people still feel like inflation is out of control. Everything's ridiculously expensive. It is ridiculously expensive. But the issue is that, so Trump has brought inflation down from almost 10% under Biden to 0.8%, which is fantastic. But voters, that's not good enough, right? Voters in their mind, they want prices to go back to what they should be. And in their mind, what they should be is what they were in 2019. Now, honestly, they should be what they were in 1965. So, the Fed's been screwing up inflation for a long time. But anyway, that's what's going through voters' minds. So when you get opinion surveys that ask voters, what do you think about inflation? They say it's out of control. It's nuts. Everything is going up. Statistically, it's not going up, but I understand where they're going or where they're coming from because things are still massively more expensive than they were a couple of years ago. And so the question is, part of that is explaining to people, difference between levels and rates and things like that. But I think, really what you have to do is actually start bringing prices down. In other words, not a low rate of inflation, but actually cutting prices. So you could cut home prices, healthcare, insurance. There's a lot of states where insurance has skyrocketed. That's a big issue. Home insurance, car car costs. There's a lot of areas where you have room to cut. I think that's what's bothering voters is that these prices are not coming down, that it looks like we are stuck with those horrible Biden prices forever.
So how do you bring those prices down? I mean, how do you, other than the market speaking, consumers stop buying cars? We've seen a housing slowdown. I guess it's happening. It is happening because I'm in one of those states where insurance is off the charts, in the South and Florida, and car insurance, homeowners insurance. I've got an $1,100 increase over last year. Had never had a claim, not one time, but I'm going to pay $1,100 more this year than last year. And so those rates keep going up, but I am seeing the slowdown in housing, and I am seeing homes not move. I mean, it used to be that you could put a house on the market here where I live and do nothing to it, and you didn't have to negotiate, and you were going to get at least asking price, if not more. These houses are sitting now, and people are either having to move on their price and negotiate, or they are having to do things to the house to get it sold. Only the homes that are fully updated and renovated are moving quickly, where people can come in and it's move-in ready. That's it. That's a big change here.
Yeah, some of that is what the Fed did with interest rates. So the Fed during COVID lowered interest rates because they wanted to essentially write a blank check for federal lockdowns. And that, because of that, people could then get mortgages at like 3%, sometimes in the twos. And then, that of course caused inflation. It always does when government spends a lot. And so the Fed tried to stop that by jacking interest rates really quickly. And so what that did was that you've got this weird market where you have tens of millions of Americans who have mortgages at 3%. But if they were to sell and buy another house, then they would have to pay like 6.5% or 7%. So traditionally what would happen is that the kids grow up, you have this giant, 4-bedroom house, and so you sell it and you downscale to a condo. Well, people can't do that because they have to buy or they have to get a 6% mortgage on the condo. So what that's done is frozen a lot of housing now, where you'll have empty nesters who are essentially hogging up this giant house. And that's starting to unfreeze a little bit because interest rates are coming back down. But one of the issues is that there are a couple of numbers in the economy where if you screw with those numbers, you cause a lot, just years and years of distortion that's going to lock up a bunch of markets. And interest rates are probably the single biggest number that you should not screw with. And of course, that's what the Fed does for a living. It's part of the reason why so many people are hostile to the Fed. And they absolutely did that with housing. More broadly, if you are trying to actually bring prices down, like if you're trying to get deflation, negative inflation, which is very good for the economy, of course, the sort of mainstream Fed perspective is that deflation is the enemy, but that's not true. If you look back through American history, the periods that we've had deflation, falling prices, have actually been the golden ages. If you actually wanted to do that right now, there's really two levers. One of them is reduce federal spending. Federal spending effectively prints new money. The second is deregulation. So there are particularly healthcare and housing are some of the biggest areas, also energy, where the quantity of regulations, people have no idea how massive they are. If you look at healthcare, for example, the costs of healthcare are probably 2 to 3 times higher than they should be because the industries buy regulations. The sort of marketing on regulations is that, bad things happen, the people rise up and they realize that the government has to control industry. So this is cute, right? What actually happens is that big companies write checks to senators, and then those companies write the regulations. Okay, because who else is going to write them, right? The people who actually work in Congress are like 23-year-olds who make $32,000. Okay, they don't know anything about a healthcare regulation. Who's writing these things? The hospitals, the pharma companies, right? So on, Wall Street. And so if you look at industry by industry, regulations just massively drive up the costs. The National Association of Home Builders estimates that regulations in housing and house building add $94,000 to the cost of a home. A lot of this is green stuff, or it's zoning. It's companies that literally write in specifications according to whatever they sell for a living, right? So they require you to buy a certain type of gutter, a certain kind of window. And it's endless. I mean, people have tried to count the number of regulations. They've given up. All we know is page count. Okay, so literally that's how they count regulations, is they just look at the pages, and it's astronomical. So they've done a little bit of that. It's actually been, last year was the most deregulatory on record. So they cut about 500 regulations. Trump has been doing everything he can. He actually cut 100 regulations for every new one. Remember when he was first elected back in 2016, he promised that he was going to cut 2 for every one, 2 out, 1 in. That's 100 to 1. But there are still hundreds of thousands of regulations in there that drive the cost up. So if we could deregulate across the board, you could cut healthcare prices by 2 to 3-fold. You could cut house prices probably by 1/3. You could cut prices across the board by probably 20%. So you could do that in food, in energy. It could be easier permitting to have pipelines or to have power generation. So, I mean, really, the way to reverse things, to cancel out all of the Biden inflation would be a combination of cutting congressional spending and then deregulation. Now, of course, Washington does not want to do either of these, right? It got paid good money for those regulations. It's not about to throw them away. It's paid to keep them going. Congressional spending, of course, is the whole kit and caboodle. We're looking at what's happening with the Somalis in Minnesota. that's kind of the poster child for it. But I mean, across the board, there are millions of people, probably tens of millions of people who are engaging in welfare fraud and waste. You put that together, and it's trillions of dollars. And all of these get paid back to corrupt politicians. So whether it's the regulation or the spending, there's kickbacks across the board. So it's very, very difficult to cut those, right? Elon tried with Doge. Trump has been trying, ever since Trump first took office, he's been trying to cut federal spending. Every budget in his first term had significant cuts, 60, 100, 200 billion. Every time Congress said no, because Congress is paid to do that.
Switching gears just a little bit, since we touched on the interest rates, we have a new Fed chair nominee. It was one of the Kevins. We knew it was going to be one of the Kevins. Kevin Warsh. What do you think we should be paying attention to as the new Fed chair comes in? What sort of your crystal ball tell you about it?
Yeah, he's a fascinating pick. So most of the guys that Trump was looking at were what's called easy money Fed chairs, meaning that they would make money very cheap. They would cut rates. They would do something called quantitative easing, which is where the Fed goes out and just buys stuff and prints new money for it. Okay, so all of those picks look very inflationary. And you've seen gold, silver, and stock markets all go up because all of those markets like inflation. Consumers don't like inflation, but markets love inflation because it makes numbers go up. And then Trump picked this guy, Kevin Warsh, who is by far the hardest money guy, meaning he's the guy who wants to raise rates. He wants to cut the amount of money being printed. And so that walloped gold and silver last Friday. They just absolutely collapsed. Gold went down 10% in a day, which is pretty epic for gold. Silver went down 30%. That was the biggest move since 1792. Okay. So markets very much viewed Kevin Warsh as the guy who's going to fight inflation. Now, what's interesting about him is that going on 15 years now, Warsh has been saying that he wants to fundamentally change the Fed. And specifically what he wants to do is steer the Fed in a direction where it is lowering interest rates. Okay, now normally that's inflationary. It's very good, if you're trying to buy a house or you're trying to build a business and borrow money, it's very good for you, but it's inflationary. So Kevin Warsh has been saying he wants to lower interest rates, but he wants to cancel out the inflation by making the Fed sell off all of these Wall Street assets that it owns. So the Fed has about $6.5 trillion that it bought up most of it during COVID. So he wants to sell that off. So essentially, he wants to make money easy for Wall Street to boost growth on Wall Street. And he wants he wants to boost growth for Main Street, and he wants Wall Street to pay for it. So this is a fascinating combination. I think gold and silver are misreading him. He's not exactly a hard money guy in terms of inflationary. What he wants to do is to kind of strangle Wall Street and then give the goodies to Main Street. That is much better for job growth, right? The games that Wall Street plays, the financing and the private equity, those are not good for jobs. Right? The people who create jobs are small businesses, Main Street. You can give them a $1 million loan and they might create several jobs off of that. Whereas Wall Street, they can give out $1 billion and actually cut jobs with it. So I think Warsh is going to be surprising for markets. I think markets are starting to realize this. Silver today, I think, was up 10%. So I think that the truth is starting to percolate that this is not the guy who's going to strangle the economy. This is the guy who's going to make growth even faster, and he's going to keep a lid on inflation.
So how do we message that to the American people so that they feel good about things that are coming and feel good about the future in how the Fed is going to steer this ship? Because, I mean, let's be real. I mean, the Fed has so much control over our economy, inflation, economic growth, and a lot of it is, above Americans' head. They don't totally know what the Fed does on a daily basis and how it impacts our economy, other than when they're going to buy a house or a car and they look at the interest rates and they're like, wow, they're really high right now. But how do we message this guy's he's got the tiller and he's going to steer us right?
Well, to be clear, so Warsh is good for a Fed chair, but the Federal Reserve is they should be arrested. It's it's a legalized counterfeiting operation, right? So I would like to shut it down. I don't want to tell America,
But reality is reality. Like, like how do we? Because right now
right.
Trump has, he's taken over the Fed. He's put his guy in. There's all that messaging, and it's like, no. Here's what this guy's going to do, and here's how it matters to you on Main Street, and here's what you can expect as an everyday, ordinary American.
Right. So I think this Fed is going to be much less harmful than it has under Powell. I think Powell's been an absolute catastrophe. If Warsh's goal is to help Main Street and make Wall Street pay for it, I mean, that's the exact opposite of Jerome Powell, right? Jerome Powell is not an economist. He's an investment banker. He's a lawyer by trade. He has no idea how an economy works. His entire, 7 years has been the exact opposite. So make it rain on Wall Street, punish Main Street. So I think that's an important message to get out, is that, if we're going to have a legalized counterfeiter picking our pockets, this is about as good as it gets. By the way, J.D. Vance has talked about getting rid of the Fed. So that could be exciting coming in 2028. And, I think broadly speaking, Trump is admirably skeptical of the Fed. I don't think he's a huge fan of the Fed as an organization. But, in terms of the Fed mismanaging the economy, I think that Warsh will do a lot better than we've had in a long time. Probably the best guy that we've had since the creation of the Fed is Paul Volcker back in the 1970s, who fixed the inflation back then. I don't know that Warsh is quite that harsh, but he's pretty good.
Okay. Let's switch gears again and talk about these Trump accounts. Just sort of at a basic level, how do they work? And what do we expect from those?
Yeah, so the idea is to give $1,000 to every newborn as an investment account. So this would operate like your IRA or 401k. Of course, it wouldn't be taxed. So that would come from the government. And then a lot of organizations, including Heritage, are matching those. The reason, there's a couple different reasons for doing that. So one of them is to get kids used to the idea how an investment works, right? This is something that kids should have learned in school, but of course they were spending their time on gender theory. So teach kids how investments work. Also the fact that, investments tend to go up. And so this is kind of exciting, right? But a lot of people feel like they're outside, like it's a party that's going on that they're not invited to. And I mean, anybody can save money. You can buy stocks and then you can watch your stocks go up. It's good fun. You'll get rich over time. So that's one reason, is kind of get people used to investing, kind of break the ice. It's also to kind of a useful side effect is to give people something to lose. Like if they screw around, then, they're going to lose their account. There are particularly a lot of young men who feel like they don't have a stake in anything. They own nothing. They don't really care what happens. And then, sort of the long-term benefit here, which Secretary Bessent has talked about, is that if you look at compounding, that $1,000, that could become $500,000 by your retirement, right? So, I mean, if you leave it there and you let it compound, actually, if you look at stock market performance since, over the past 25 years, since 2000, it's actually been 11% per year, nominal. And so that would become close to $1 million, right? That's a chunk of change that comes just out of $1,000. Now, partly that's nice because maybe a lot of people might leave it there and it might actually grow. It's also good to remind kids that, it's not magic to become a millionaire. Just put your work in, set aside $50 a paycheck, and you will get there. So I think it's a good idea, and it addresses specifically. It's not going to make a big difference to middle class kids. I think it will make a big difference to working class kids.
Well, there's been a big, obviously there always is. Critics are saying it primarily benefits the wealthy. How do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, working class kids typically don't have any assets whatsoever, whereas, middle class kids tend to get inheritances. So, I mean, this will, if their argument is that the parents are going to drain the account early, that's much more risk with any other kinds of savings than it is with this account, where it's tax privileged on the way in as long as you keep it in there.
Okay, are people able to add to it?
Yep. Yeah, you can add to it up to $5,000 a year tax free.
Okay.
But again, this is something where rich families are already giving to the kids, and the point here is to build actual assets for the kids, where rather than the kids just sort of sitting around wasting their lives waiting for their payout when they're 50, they're actually starting to build assets.
And everybody qualifies.
Yep, everybody qualifies, every newborn. I suspect, it was bipartisan, which is very rare in Washington these days. I suspect that they're going to try to expand it out so that, currently it's just aimed at newborns. But if the idea is so popular and it's kind of obviously popular, I suspect that they're going to try to expand it out so that people with minors can contribute on their behalf.
Well, I mean, I think it's a great idea.
Yep.
I come from a middle-class family, and my dad always said to me that money was for spending, which was not a good thing, because by the time I got old enough to go to college, we did a pay-go plan. So we paid as we went. There was no savings. There was no 529. There was no, master plan other than to write the check every semester, which frankly, I'm thankful he could, but that was the plan.
Yeah. Yeah. When it's striking, I think it's important for people, middle class or rich people tend to understand how finances work. But for a lot of working class families, it looks like science fiction to them, right? The idea that they would ever have $1 million or that they would ever be comfortable in retirement looks like complete science fiction. And when you actually look at the numbers, you save a little bit when you're young and you let it compound, and you buy a house. Right, a house kind of forces you to save because you got to cover the mortgage. And meanwhile, the house goes up in value. So again, you have the power of compounding. It's not that hard, even if you are working a blue collar job. If you do those two things, you save 10% of your paycheck and you buy a house as soon as you have the down payment. If you do those two things, you are going to be a millionaire in your 50s. It is not, science fiction. And I think that's very important. A lot of Republican administrations have tried to spread that message. W called it the stakeholder capitalism or something. They've tried. This one, I think, I agree with you. I like it because it's very easy for people to understand. I think the biggest argument you can make against it is that, whatever money is going to the account should go to paying down debt. I think that's true, but compared to the millions of things the federal government does that are much worse than this, giving poor kids kind of a grub stake, making them feel like they have a stake in success and something that's building, that strikes me as important. It also, of course, in the long run, it takes people off the welfare rolls, right? Mm-hmm. So if a kid lets it grow and it gets to $1 million by the time they're 65, the rest of us don't have to pay for them. So honestly, I think there's a pretty good payback on it.
I do too. I think it's a really neat idea, and I'm glad that they were able to make it happen in a bipartisan way. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us. I love the language you speak. It is the language of Main Street. We understand it, and our audience understands it, and everyday ordinary Americans understand it. And so I'm glad that you speak that language just like we do. Tell everybody where they can learn more about you and the Heritage Foundation.
So I'm on X, the artist formerly known as Twitter. I put out daily videos. They're about 3.5 minutes long, just real fast on economics and freedom. Those are at Prof Stonge or Prof Stonge, ProfStonge. And then, of course, visit Heritage Foundation. We do a lot of work. We are very supportive of what's happening right now in this country, and we're excited to be part of the solutions.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time on Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll be back soon with another episode. Bye for now.